This is Torah Nation TV, and we are speaking today with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom Harav Bar-Hayim. Yom HaAtzmaut is approaching, and many observant Jews are made to feel that if one is really Frum, one does not mark or care about this day. Should Frum Jews celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut?
When the Jewish people found themselves standing on the shores of Yam Suf, the Red Sea, with the Egyptians chasing them and rapidly approaching from behind, they cried out to Hashem, and God, as we know, caused the waters to divide, and the Jews crossed through the sea on dry land, and were saved from the Egyptians, who were subsequently drowned. As a result of this great salvation, we find in the Torah, in the book of Shemot, Exodus, it says, "Az yashir Moshe u'bnei Yisrael et hashira azot ladonai." Upon this occurrence, Moshe and the Jewish people sang a song of praise to Hashem. So the first thing we have to appreciate is that the Jewish people are always required to thank Hashem when He does some great act, some outstanding event takes place, which clearly is orchestrated and carried out by Hashem for His people. We are required to thank and praise Hashem. This idea is mentioned and developed by the sages, by Hazal, in a number of places. For example, in the Talmud Bavli, in Masechet Megillah, Daf Yud Daled, page 14a in the tractate of Megillah, in the Talmud, it speaks precisely about this fact, and it says that on this basis the sages instituted the requirement to read the Megillah on Purim, for example, in order to thank Hashem. Furthermore, it states in Tractate Pesachim 117a that the prophets and the sages after them enacted the recitation of Hallel, which are certain chapters from the book of Psalms, the book of Tehillim. The sages and the prophets enacted the recitation of certain chapters of Tehillim in order to thank Hashem for such occurrences. And the example that is given there by Rashi in his commentary on the Talmud is, Rashi says, Kigon Hanukkah, such as Hanukkah. In other words, Hanukkah is not a one-time event. The redemption of the Jewish people from their enemies, the time of the Maccabees, over 2,000 years ago, was not a one-time event. The fact that we say Hallel for 8 days in commemoration of those events, and to thank Hashem for that redemption and that national salvation and that victory over our enemies, that is something from which we are supposed to learn. That's why Rashi says, Kigon Hanukkah, such as Hanukkah. Just as we did this at the time of Hanukkah, so we are required to do at the present time. The Hatam Sofer, a well-known and illustrious halachic authority of approximately 200 years ago, writes in two halachic responsa that the requirement to thank Hashem in such situations is a Torah obligation. It is a miswah min ha-Torah. So it is clear, without a doubt, that when the Jewish people found themselves in danger, not just of losing their land and their control over their own existence and the possibility of self-government and independence here in the land of Israel in 1948, but in fact were facing annihilation at the hands of the Arabs, who, without a doubt, had they been victorious, would have annihilated the Jewish population of the land of Israel. There is no doubt that we are required to thank Hashem and not to forget for one moment the great miracles and the outstanding events that led to this historic event, which has, as we all know, changed the situation of the Jewish people radically and for the better, without a doubt. That is not to say that the Jewish people today in the land of Israel are living an ideal existence in every respect. There is still much room for improvement, that is true. But not to recognize the fact that the Jewish people are today living in the land of Israel. In fact, approximately half of the Jewish people worldwide today live in Israel. Some say even a majority of the Jewish people today reside here in the land of Israel. Not to recognize this fact, and not only that are we here, we are also living as an independent sovereign nation for the first time in over 2,000 years. This historical watershed event cannot be overlooked by anyone who believes that it is God, the God of Israel, who directs the events of history.
Some claim that because the state of Israel is not based upon Torah principles, therefore one should refrain from identifying with it. What would the Rav say regarding this proposition?
When it comes to dealing with situations that are neither black nor white, but rather grey, and there are many shades of grey, of course, one has to adopt a mature and balanced position. So this is not a unique situation. In many areas of life, in our personal lives, in our national life as a nation, we have to deal with the facts and the realities as they are. So yes, it is correct on the one hand, as we said, to recognize the tremendous salvation and victory that Hashem gave to us in Tafshin Het in 1948, to recognize what this has meant for the Jewish people, how this has rejuvenated the Jewish nation and created realities and facts on the ground here in the land of Israel and around the world that were simply unimaginable a couple of generations ago. We have to recognize these facts and be grateful and thankful to Hashem for these facts, for these realities, and also not lose sight of the fact that we are supposed to be a Mamlechet Kohanim and a Goy Kadosh. The Jewish people are told in the Torah that they are to be a kingdom of holy and special people, a holy nation. And we still have a long way to go to achieve that. That is true. But it is clear that this is the home, this is our homeland, this is the home of the Jewish people, this is where we belong, and this is where our destiny lies.
What additional prayers is a Jew required to say on this day?
First, a word about the day, that is to say, how we should refer to this day. Most people refer to it in Hebrew as Yom HaAtzmaut, which means Independence Day. But as Shabtai Ben Dov points out, many countries, including Zambia and Zimbabwe and Argentina, have Independence Days. The Jewish people is not just another nation, and therefore I believe we should refer to this day by the term Yom Tekumat Israel, which in Hebrew means the day of the resurrection and the coming into reality once more of the Jewish people back onto the stage of history. Now, regarding the special prayers that we need to say on this day, we mentioned, or we alluded before to Hallel, based on what the Talmud states, as well as, for instance, Bar-Hayim Gaon and the Shilo, the earliest post-Talmudic halachic work that we have, from about 1300 years ago. He makes it very clear that Hallel is to be said on such an occasion. Hallel is to be said, therefore, on Yom Tekumat Israel, but only during the day, not at night. Some say it is at night as well. This is a mistake. Hallel is only to be said during the day. It can be said all day, although it's usually said in the morning, and it should be said with a bracha, with a blessing. In addition, Al Hanisim should be said. This will not be found in many Sidurim, that's true, but we here in Machon Shilo published some years ago a birkon, that is to say a small printed version of the Grace After Meals, Birkat HaMazon, which includes an Al Nisim prayer both for Yom Tekumat Yisrael, in other words Yom HaAtzmaut, and Yom Shichrur Yerushalayim, which is Yom Yerushalayim on the 28th of Iyar. That also should be said both in Tefillah, in the Shmoneh Esrei, and also in Birkat HaMazon, in Grace After Meals. There's also a third bracha which should be said at night, or although it can also be said during the day, it should be said only once, and that is the bracha She'asa Nisim La'avotenu, the same bracha that we recite on Hanukkah and Purim. In general, it's important to understand that the halachic model for our halachic conduct on these days of Yom Tekumat Yisrael and Yom Shichrur Yerushalayim, the 5th of Iyar and the 28th of Iyar, the halachic model and basis for our conduct on these days is the halachic formula that we find regarding Hanukkah specifically, which was also a similar historic and watershed event which was served as a great salvation and redemption of the Jewish people, both at that time and for all history. And that is the basis on which we can discover the halachic parameters of what it is correct and required to say on these days.
Thank you, Harav Bar-Hayim.